You are Locked On Wildcats, your daily podcast on the Arizona Wildcats. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for listening to the Locked On Wildcats podcast. All right, now with John Schuster, I am Mike Luke. At this time of the year, we're talking a little bit of NBA. We're talking a little bit of this. We're talking a little bit of that. Schuster, did you watch the Warriors last night?
I did not, but I hear they lost.
The Warriors did lose. Now,
just like you predicted.
I did predict this.
Yep.
Now,
yep.
I got a couple questions. I got a couple questions for you first.
Does it become more difficult to ask those couple questions because I did not see last night's game?
No, not at all. Because we're on the Locked On Wildcats podcast. We're having a good time right here. Okay, now first and foremost, the Golden State Warriors. They're your pick to click. They're your pick to win it all. Correct?
You keep saying that, and at what point did I ever say that?
I thought you did.
Well,
they're very heavy betting favorites, as they should be.
They're the most likely, right? If they get their act together and focus, don't you think they're probably the most likely team to win a title? Even though you love the Heat, even though you've been picking the Heat for months.
I guess we'll find out about that one on the other side, though. With Steph Curry, watching him the other day, and I thought a commentator made, a very, very interesting point about Steph Curry, that he says, and I think Steve Kerr has really brought the best out of him on this, where he says the gravitational pull that Steph Curry, and I love that term in basketball parlance, that gravitational pull that Steph Curry brings with him everywhere is amazing. He said he could be 2 of 17, but when he's running around that three-point line, he's bringing 2 people with him. He said it's one of the few guys in league history that can play an absolutely terrible game when he goes out there, but you're still impacting the game to where it feels like you're playing 6-on-5.
Yeah, and as a result, or 4-on-3 or whatever the situation may ultimately be. Yeah, that is an interesting dynamic where you constantly have to focus on him because he's capable of making a shot from anywhere on the floor at any given time and turning the tide of a game. And the difference probably with him, and I assume this is what the individual who was saying this was getting to, is that he's such a devastating sharpshooter when he's on that obviously 3 is more than 2. You string together 2 3-pointers, 3 3-pointers, and now you've really opened up a lead, and it becomes difficult for significantly more difficult for the other team to catch up. So you have to keep focusing on him, and allows Golden State to open the floor in a lot of other ways and get easy baskets on a fairly consistent basis. Okay,
now the rest of the team, though, is absolutely they fit in very, very well with obviously what they want to do. How in the world, and we've talked about this before, is this just a case of Steve Kerr being just a normal person as opposed to what Mark Jackson was, where I just have to be able to do what I want to do when I want to do? Because
okay, here. Let's simplify and since we're doing the Locked On Wildcat podcast, I know you hate comparisons, despise comparisons. Comparisons annoy you more than anything else in the history of sports in any capacity. But I'm going to try to make a comparison here to Wildcat fans on a basketball connectivity level. Mark Jackson is Sean Miller. Tommy Lloyd is Steve Kerr. So there is a belief in system and there is a belief in player. Mm-hmm. And Kerr, I think, and Lloyd, while they believe in what it is they want to do and the foundation that is put into place, they ultimately believe in the player. Jackson and Miller believe in the system first and want the player to fit into the system before the system ultimately fits into the player. And I think that, in its most simplified definition, is probably the relative difference between the two. What can your player do for you as opposed to what can your player do for the system? The system gets you only so far. But then you have to figure out, okay, how do I adapt to the player? And if I have to tweak the system for the player, I'd rather do that as opposed to going overboard and tweaking the player into the system. I believe, generally speaking, that Miller tweaked the player to the system, that Jackson tweaked the player to the system. Kerr and Lloyd, and certainly Lute Olson is the foundation of this, tweak the system to the player. And I believe that provides more confidence for the player, believing that they have more of an open template to be successful, and that the coach believes in you as opposed to believing in the system before believing in you.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to that too. Now, first and foremost, let's talk about BetOnline, because if you wanted to go to BetOnline, that would be the place that you would be able to bet on De La Terra. Oh my gosh, do we have a comment here?
Yeah, look at that. Look at that.
Holy moly.
I'll let you address that one too.
That's a football player. Yes, so
thank you.
Now we'll get to that in just a second there, Ben's boy. Yeah. But let me put it to you like this.
By the way, thanks for dropping by. Yes, anyway. BetOnline.
Yes. All right, real quick. BetOnline, that's where you would want to go to be able to bet on all of this stuff. That's where you would want to go to bet on the Warriors, any of that stuff. That's where you would go. It's really that simple, that easy. Make it your stop, make it your one-stop stop for everything. Let's take a quick break. Thanks for keeping it locked on Wildcats. Ben's boy, thoughts on Malik Reed? Defensive end, we'll see what he can do this coming season. I'm a fan, but there's a lot of guys like that hit the portal that you weren't really sure about. So I can't really give you much more on that than what
I'm curious, maybe along the way, what his thoughts are on Malik Reed. Maybe
we would like to know about your thoughts on Malik Reed. That's called an open invite. Okay, Shu. Yes, I think you hit the nail on the head, though, that I think so much of the NBA is just being able, coaches to know how to put their guys in the right position to be able to succeed. I know that sounds so cliche-ish, but it's kind of like with the Phil Jackson thing. Everybody says, I could have won 11 titles with Phil Jackson. You know who never won anything before Phil Jackson or after Phil Jackson? And again, this isn't to diminish them. Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. You know who never won anything before or after Phil Jackson? Kobe Bryant. He obviously did something right there, because if it was just that easy, then somebody else would have walked right in there and won championships.
Yeah,
you don't like it.
There's obviously a lot of other stuff that goes into how those are constructed. I think, especially with Jordan, who was in the tail end of his, career at that stage. But there's a lot to be said about constructing a team and making it work too, and having both of those elements feed effectively off one another. So, I guess you could argue that Jackson then had to go somewhere else to repeat the dynamic, whereas a player doesn't have that opportunity. At Chicago, Jackson didn't win any other titles, without Jordan either. And in LA, to some degree, the same thing happened once Bryant leaves, So I guess that's one of those things that can work both. The simple version of this, and I think it's more. I was about to say it's more notable at the college level, but you can make equally as many pro examples, I guess, as well. But collegiately, I think you do have guys who trust their players less, and so they believe so much in the system that they want their players to be regimented to fit into that, and they try to recruit to that as effectively as possible. Whereas you get the occasional coach at that level who's a lot more free-flowing, who has a foundation, and this is the delicate balance. You still have to have a foundation. You can't be Steve Lavin and maybe Penny Hardaway and just roll out the basketball and expect good results. There's one thing to be a player's coach, but there's also a little bit of structure isn't a bad thing. So there has to be a balance between, I think, the player first and how he benefits the system is, or rather how the system benefits the player is probably the direction to go. You want to have trust in the player. And I think the good coaches at both levels are the ones who understand what that balance is and can convince players that the foundation matters, but they can still succeed on their own within that. And the coach is willing to adapt accordingly to get the best out of a player and his talents that are available in an effort to achieve, a common goal.
All right, let's take a quick break. All right, thanks for listening to Locked On Wildcats. We will be back with you tomorrow, breaking down some more of this, also breaking down something that I was talking with Schuster. I wanted to talk a little bit more with Schuster about. For John Schuster, I am Mike Luke.